Namaste and welcome to my channel. Before we go into what is Jinn worship and who regards this as Jinn worship and who regards that as Jinn worship, the most, if you like, the best approach, the scientific approach, would be to see who worships the Jinn the most. Now, this argument is very easily answered, but we have to go back a few hundred years to say the least. In 1354, Sultan Feroz Shah Tulka built this fort. Now, this fort is shrouded in mystery and legend. It's been attacked, it's been burnt down, it's had absolutely everything happen to it. However, the place is now in ruins, and it has been in ruins for hundreds and hundreds of years. But how does that affect somebody who wants to worship Jinn? Every Thursday, thousands and thousands of people go to worship the Jinn. Now, literally, the fort is ruins. Ironically, there is also a mosque at the fort, but the mosque does not worship Allah. The mosque actually worships the Jinn. So, so this is a really good place to understand how Jinn worship is done. Now, when I went there with my wife, and we pretended to be tourists, and we looked round. We saw things like black mirrors. However, a majority of the worship was done by building fires in alcoves, and also, ironically, writing letters, wishing letters. So my eyes were really opened by this. Now, the other interesting thing, there was lots of Muslim binding spells everywhere, on the walls, above the gates. And when you walked around the fort, everything was very, very peaceful. Now, in Feroz Kotla, I've mentioned it before, there is a mosque. It's called Jami Mashhad. It parallels the fort. It's also understood to be one of the most ancient and largest surviving mosques of the Tuareg dynasty, 1320 to 1413. The mosque is really surreal. It's a surreal place of Muslim worship. Venerating the Genie according to Shira law cannot be through idols or graves. So therefore, their presence is acknowledged by painting small portions of the mosque on walls and alcoves. So when you go to the mosque, you can see black painted spaces, and these are what people worship. Now, interestingly, many tourists insist that they're witnessing a form of Dargah worship, which is a shrine built over a grave of a religious figure, or a Sufi saint, or a dervish, for example. They think this is being practiced at Jami Masjid. However, this is false. The only creatures to be worshipped at this mosque are the Jinn. And I think we have to understand that this is one of the oldest mosques. They don't worship Allah, they worship the Jinn. Something to really think about. As you can see, this is a Muslim. Well, is he a Muslim? He classes himself as a Muslim. And as I've said before, this is the oldest mosque in the world, and they don't worship Allah, they worship the Jinn. So this, as an occultist, this really makes me ask a lot of questions. So if these guys worship the Jinn, and this is the oldest mosque, then surely the worship of Jinn came before the worship of Muhammad, so to speak. Well, not Muhammad, the worship of Allah. So, we really have to think about this. Like I said, as an occultist, it raises far more questions than it actually answers. It's not just me who thinks like this as well. There have been very prominent Muslim scholars who have actually stated that because the Jinn are older than the Quran, then they could not have been an invention of Allah. It's a really moot point, and it's something worth thinking about. Now, if you believe in the Muslim system, then you accept that Allah made everything. Now, if Allah made everything, then essentially he made everything before and after his invention. There is a prayer called Al-Quzi, which more or less states that. However, there is also the moot point that the Jinn were worshipped a long time before Allah. Well, actually at the same time. When we look at the history of the Arab religion, it's certainly very different to what we're told, because the worshipping of the Jinn is definitely before the worship of Muhammad's Allah. However, at the same time, there was Allah, who was a moon god. They were worshipped at the Kaaba. The Kaaba has 365 gods, one for every day of the week. And essentially, this is the juxtaposition. So, it's a very moot point. However, as a scientist, I have to look at evidence. And to me, the evidence is quite clear. The oldest mosque in the world worships Jinn. You can see from the picture, there is a flame burning, there is blacked out alcove, and the guy is worshipping that. So, these things really have to be taken into consideration. The other thing as well is that there is a very interesting juxtaposition which was made into a book called The Satanic Verses, where Muhammad suggested that his followers worshipped the daughters of Allah. Now that's another interesting twist. But categorically and historically, the Jinn go way back to Mesopotamia. So worship of the Jinn historically was certainly before the full-time worship of Allah. Let's try and understand when Jinn worship started at this fort. Well, there was a guy, well, not a guy, there was a sheikh called Shah in the 1970s, and he began worshipping the Jinn at Feroz al-Kotla. If we look in this picture, we can see a type of a pyramid. On top of the pyramid, there is a pillar from the time of Ashoka, and it's full of philosophy from that time written in Sanskrit. Now, interestingly, it's not rotted. Yes, it has broken because people are quite clumsy, but it hasn't rotted. And that stands on top of the pyramid. Each floor of the pyramid is dedicated to a Jinn. However, it's not guaranteed the Jinn will be there. And apparently, according to the locals, the Jinn swap offices all the time. Underneath this pyramid, there is also a dungeon, which the Jinn are also worshipped at. Now, interestingly, a bunch of students came here thinking that the Jinn were nothing more than the wisecracking blue genie in the Aladdin series. And they went to the top of the pyramid. As you can see, there's a cage around the pyramid, and that's to stop people touching it. It doesn't really, because they stretch through it and they put their hands on it to be blessed from the, well, what they presume is an antenna to the Jinn. It doesn't really matter whether it's an antenna or not. People do it and they believe in it. However, this girl went to the top and she started decrying the Jinn. And this was on a Thursday. There was thousands of people there. And according to accounts, a Jinn came to her, picked her up, and threw her to her death. Now, whether or not this is true, I don't know, but when thousands of people or hundreds of people repeat the same story, one has to give it credence. Yes, somebody could have been dressed as a Jinn, ran to the top of the pyramid and threw on the floor. However, the sad fact is this girl died. Now, interestingly, when they followed it up with police investigations, nothing was found. So was it a supernatural occurrence? Possibly. However, one thing I can tell you is when you go into this pyramid, you can feel the presence of the Jinn very, very easily. However, it's not an oppressive presence. It actually feels quite peaceful. The only thing that I would say is although it's peaceful, that there is a lack of what you would call a deeper love. That may be because I didn't want to connect to that deeper love, and I only wanted to connect to what was the peaceful environment. I don't know. However, this is one of the first places in Feroz el-Kotla where people will go to worship. Essentially, how the worshipping is done, they go round the whole fort to the various offices of the Jinn, writing their letters, praying, summoning, fires, gifts, and they do that 7 times. And really it's very, very dangerous because quite a lot of the dungeons are full of bats, and there is a tick that lives on the bat, and if that tick lands on you, it can kill you. So, it's a very dangerous occupation. However, people get their wishes answered. Ordinarily, when one goes to Feroz el-Kotla, this is where one starts in the pyramid. This is a typical alcove, a place of worship for the Jinn at Feroz el-Kotla. Interestingly, most Hindus are vegetarian, so there isn't any blood sacrifices per se. Some do cut their finger and put it on the altar, but many, as we can see, use garlands and they use flames. One would presume that this is to a Hindu Jinn, just by the way it's laid out. Now, the reason why I don't know 100% is because at Feroz el-Kotla everything costs you money. So you ask somebody what it is, they ask for money first, and it may not necessarily be the truth. However, in my experience and what I understand about Hinduism, this has the hallmarks of a Hindu Jinn. Now, quite interestingly, Hindu jinns are supposed to be the most dangerous. Now, I don't know if that is true. I've certainly experienced very dangerous shaitan. Whether or not they are Hindu, Muslim, Christian, I don't know. Once again, if we look at this alcove, it's got paint in it. Now, the reason why it's got paint in it is because, once again, I can presume this is a Hindu Jinn, because the paint represents Holi. Okay, Holi is a festival where everybody throws paint at one another. When I stay in India, in all honesty, I just keep out the way of it, because it's gone beyond religious significance. It's just an organized mafia. Essentially, they block the road up. You drive up in your car or your motorcycle, and they ask you for money. And if you don't get money, you get pelted with paint. It really isn't it's not religious at all. And where it used to last one day, it now lasts a week. And literally every single road you go to has a block on it, and they're trying to get money out of you. However, I don't want to distract, but I'm just trying to explain what the significance of the paint is. And as I've said, this is very possibly, again, they're worshipping a Hindu Jinn. It's very important to remember that people who worship Jinn believe that they are Muslim, they are Christian, they are Coptic, they are all types of religious values and belief systems. However, in Feroz al-Kotla, following Ladu Shah, we can presume that the Jinn that is worshipped there mainly is, of course, Hindu Jinn. This is the backside of the pyramid. You can see that it's covered with smoke, and you can also get a very good idea of the size of the beak, whatever you want to call it. What's the best thing to call it? I'm trying to think. I suppose it's a pillar, really. It's not really a monolith. Now, this pillar, ironically, is 13.1 meters long, and it comes from the time of Ashoka, which means that it's over 1700 years old. On it is written this: religion increaseth among men by two separate processes, by performance of religious offices and by security against persecution. Now, this is really important to understand if you are working with the Jinn. Literally, you have to be quite pious, and you have to be very dedicated to praying to a higher force, because once you start working with the Jinn, they will try and extract energy. You can call it attack or extracting energy. That's what they try to do. So the Muslims will use dua, Christians will use holy prayer, Hindus will also use holy prayer all the time. The fact is that if you are working with the Jinn, then one has to keep oneself pious and of clean mind and of clean energy, because essentially these are creatures that feed off energy. There are many people believe that the Jinn are some type of extraterrestrial, that they bear many of the traits of extraterrestrials. They live in a different level of reality to ours, and they come through to this reality. Another thing is that they are regarded as mortal as opposed to immortal. However, they can live for thousands of years, so compared to us, they're virtually immortal. But the one thing that I will say is if you are going to be a worshipper of the Jinn, or somebody who summons the Jinn, you have to really be pious, and you have to understand that your soul is on the line. And how this happens is quite often, if somebody dies and they have been attached by the Jinn, they will end up in what is called the kaf, and then they will have to live their life as a Jinn forever. Now, it depends on whether or not you believe in the final summoning, when the whole world will be pushed towards a god and you will be judged on this. This may or may not be true. All the religions talk about a final judgment. However, if you want to die and you want to peacefully move on and you want to transition into a peaceful state, but you can't because you're trapped within the world of the kaf, and that then you have to prey on humans for energy, this is probably not a good way to spend the afterlife. So it's well worth remembering that if one wants to worship the Jinn, one has to be pious inside, and one has to be really aware that there is a superior force which goes through the universe, and one has to obey that superior force, and that superior force will help you. For example, if we look at my ring is a genuine Kadom ring. It's incredibly powerful. Now, essentially, if you have a Kadom ring, you have to read it verses from the Quran, because essentially this is what feeds the entity which is inside the ring. And by feeding the entity inside the ring, you then build up a relationship with the entity, and that in turn it will protect you. Unlike the Jinn, the Kadom cannot be ordered. It won't do anything that you tell it to do. However, if you have a good relationship with it, it will protect you, and it will allow you to maybe make the odd request or make the odd wish, so to speak. However, the Kadom it's not a pet, and one has to treat it with absolute respect, because if you don't, then usually the pain is physical. During the summer, the ring was getting hot on my right hand, and I changed it to my left hand, and it actually burnt. And literally, it was a big red burn mark. So, the one thing I implore to you is that, Jinn magic is not fake. It is 100% real. I mean, do not kid yourself on one level that this is not real. The Jinn are 100% real. If you do not respect them, if you do not, as it says, pray and be pious, then essentially, you are throwing yourselves to forces which are incalculable. Now, if you look at this arch, above it, in terracotta, is a binding spell. Now, it's very important, if you're going to work with the Jinn, that you have to know the binding spells. Now, the binding spells are for your protection. Here we can see the binding spell is above a tunnel which leads to a dungeon. The dungeon is locked. Many of the dungeons are locked in Feroz or Kotla. I would imagine they contain extremely vicious shaitan, and only really an adept should go anywhere near a shaitan. I was recently attacked by a shaitan, and I can assure you it was the worst experience of my life. And that was with protection. So if I wouldn't have been protected, I would imagine it would have been even worse. However, going back to the fort, we can see that in terracotta is the binding spell. You can see beyond it that the entrance to the dungeon is in fact locked. There are many dungeons that are open, however this one remains locked, and really God knows what's inside that dungeon. So under Jami Majid's ancient pattern floors, this provides a roof for a series of underground cells made of quartzite stone. They're also, some of them have plaster on, but these, as you can see, do not have plaster on. However, these are a type of a cloister. They're not really used for worshipping the Jinn. People will go here to meditate, and it's very important to get oneself in the right frame of mind. It's very easy to see where the Christian church got the idea of cloisters from, because obviously there would have been many ancient forts destroyed in India and Persia, and people would have used them for meditation. Now, the Christian church is a very powerful religion. There's no two ways round that, especially the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, if one looks at the Catholic Mass, essentially it's ritual magic. But they borrowed many saints. They borrowed many. In fact, Saint George is King Shamash. He's from Morocco. So when people are praising Saint George of England, well, actually he's from Morocco, and he's a Jinn. His colour, by the way, is green, and he is still worshipped within Morocco. There are shrines to him everywhere. So as we can see, there's an old phrase in the Bible, there is nothing new under the sun. So let's have a look at one of the dungeons. Now this has candles. Once again, I would presume it has candles because there may be two jinns here. However, there is very little decoration. And because there's very little decoration, my instinct says that whatever jinn lives in this cloister is in fact Muslim. As you can see on the picture, there are people write letters to them asking what they want. Now, it's really important that you understand how jinn structure is formed. The jinn, if you like, are feudalistic. So the older powerful genies are the guys who are in charge, or the gods that are in charge. The younger ones have less say. Now, it's remarkably important that you know which Jinn king to contact. And it's even more important that you know the angel which works with the Jinn king. So when people go to these cloisters, a lot of them are quite ignorant of how to worship the Jinn. And so they just write letters and they plead from the bottom of their heart for the wishes that they want. However, this is the remarkable thing. The Jinn feed off the emotion, and because they feed off emotion, the prayers still get answered. However, they have to walk round the fort many, many times. Many buy gifts. Many have to give money to people who are begging, all the way to the fort. There are young children dressed as jinns. We didn't take photographs of them because, quite simply, the minute your camera comes out, bang, you've had it. They're on you and they want lots of money. And being white, I don't know where the white privilege comes in, because essentially they really want to hit you very hard for the money. However, a person will go into one of these cloisters, they will write their letter, they will plead their letter, they will whisper their letter to the Jinn that lives in that office. But as I've said before, it's highly likely that the Jinn that you want will not be there. And this is why if you go all over Feroz al-Kota, there are letters from the same people all over in every single cloister asking for their request. Now, interestingly, if they knew a modicum about Jinn worship, they would ask the king to send an emissary, and then they would find out where their Jinn is, and they would be able to do the appropriate sacrifice. They would know whether or not the Jinn was in fact Muslim, Hindu, or Christian. It's a very, very complicated system. However, it's one of the oldest systems. It goes back to Mesopotamia. So, one cannot enter the Jinn worshipping system unless you have done the research. And more importantly, as I've said before, if you want to lead a pious life, if you want to pray, if you want to believe in a much higher force, this is really the only way to worship the Jinn, because you're dealing with a creature that is continually pulling power from you as much as it can, and they're very deceptive as well. They will say many things which are quite awful, and they will suggest many things which are quite awful. So one has to be strong mentally, physically, and spiritually. But as you can see, the wishes get answered, and it's not just me saying that. It's 1,200, 1,500 people on a Thursday will go to Feroz al-Kota, and they will get their prayers answered. Interestingly, and this is really, really interestingly, a lot of the imams who allegedly don't worship Jinn will go and they will deal with a Jinn master to get what they want. So, the world of the Jinn is deceit, is trickery, and many people are involved in it which you would never understand. So even religious devotees will go to Feroz al-Kota and they will do the rituals, or they will pay a master to pull a Jinn for them so that they can get their wish. I will stress again, do not think for one moment that the worship of Jinn is anything like what Hollywood tells you. They are powerful, they are uncompromising. You can get what you want from them, however, it will cost you. So, something to really think about. The dungeons under Feroz al-Kota, they really stretch for hundreds and hundreds of meters. And most alcoves have burning coals. Yeah, so while you've got people worshipping on the mosque upstairs, underneath you have people praying to the Jinn, or worshipping the Jinn, or summoning the Jinn underneath. Now, these places are completely devoid of light, so one needs to use one's phone or a torch, because they really are dark. Many of the alcoves have got bats in them. But like I said, this is generally how a Muslim will worship the Jinn. There is nothing like letters, there are no objects, there are no gifts, there is just a wall and a flame. However, the Muslims who choose to worship these Jinn do not wish to join the other Muslims on the surface. So this may be a very good example of what is called Shir or Shahir magic, which essentially is a reversal of the Muslim tradition. Shir magic is practiced a lot more than what the Muslims will actually give credit for. Although it's illegal throughout many of the belief systems within Mohammedanism, the Shah magicians are still used to help with marriage, still used to help get money, keep your job, and keep healthy. So on one level, they're telling you the Jinn are bad and Shia is bad, and on another level, they're quite happy to go to places like Feroz Shalkota and pay these Shia magicians to get what they wish. I mentioned previously about the bats, so I put a picture in. Now, I've also done it for a little bit of drama as well, because as well as we have Hindus worshipping the Jinn, and we have Muslims worshipping the Jinn, and Christians, there is also, and Shia magicians, there's also an even darker side with Feroz Shalkota. But I've used this just to illustrate there really are bats there. Now, the darker side is magic that I've never even come across. Yeah, I've come across the instruments that they're using, but I've not come across the magic that they're using. In the next slide, you will be able to see evidence of something much darker and much more towards what we would call a sort of like dark Western magic as opposed to Eastern Western magic. However, if you're going to go to Feroz Shalkota, remember there are bats there, and the emphalysis tick is a real threat. If it lands on you and you get it and you don't notice it, you will be severely crippled by it and possibly killed. So it's something to keep in mind when you casually visit such places. Realistically, Westerners don't visit these places. Yes, it's on the tourist map and it's all very light-hearted and oh, isn't it really funny? You can see exorcisms and everything. But don't kid yourself. Feroz Shalkota is real. Many of the magicians there are fake, but there are real magicians and Shia workers there. And it is a terribly dangerous place for those who are stupid enough not to respect the Jinn and not to understand what they are getting into. But like I said, the next slide you will understand just how dark the fort really goes. Here is where Feroz Shalkota takes a very dark turn. That is a black mirror. Black mirrors have one use, and that is to summon the entity to appear in the mirror. Next to it, we have prayers written. We also have some burnt garlands and remnants of a fire on the floor. This essentially is about as dark as you can possibly get. This isn't about worshipping, this is about commanding, this is about bringing forth, this is about, really as black magic, this is about hurting people. And there's your evidence, the black mirror. I can't safely tell you what magic it is, but what I can tell you is that they burnt the laurels. They burnt people's letters, and they've only put their letters next to the wall. Now in India, where everything is literally for sale, that mirror is not attached in any way. But I'd imagine only a fool would steal that mirror. This mirror I found in one of the darkest parts of the dungeon. I don't believe it was left there by mistake. I believe it was left there because the person was confident that it would not be taken. So I'm finishing on this note. If you go to Feroz Shalkota and you go there with curiosity, then just stay at the top. Stay at the top. Watch the guys do the prayers. maybe visit one or two of the underground dungeons which are not used. Because if you're just going for curiosity, you could end up in somewhere that you really don't want. If you're a practicing magician and you want to know Feroz Kotla, then you're wise enough and clever enough to listen to the inner voice and understand when you're in danger and when you're not in danger. I saw the mirror and I understood the negativity of it. I set my camera on zoom. I did the meditation to make sure that I was protected. And I took the picture. I didn't want to go into that place. And I knew that that wouldn't make any difference, because when magic is that strong, it can permeate thousands and thousands of miles. However, I did do some very solid meditation. My final words is that the Jinn are extremely powerful, and if you use them realistically, you can get whatever you want. However, there's a fine line between using them and then you being used yourselves. If you are doing Jinn magic, sooner or later you will come across a shikhr magician, or you will come across a Sufi who has gone off the rails. Now, what happens is they do deals with very, very powerful shaitan. The shaitan like to kill. That's what they do. So of course the deal is this: you get your new sports car, you get your blonde woman, they get to kill. Great. You kill somebody who's particularly nasty, you get your sports car. Then the shaitan starts attacking you. So then you've got to do it again. You've got to kill somebody else or curse somebody else. And you get your, whatever it is, your £1 million or whatever. Then the shaitan will ask again, and it keeps asking, and it keeps asking, and it keeps asking. It never stops. It's relentless. And eventually it comes for you, and you've got nothing to give it. You're an old man or an old woman with nothing left in your life. There's nothing that you can give it. It doesn't want your energy. It just wants you. So you end up being its slave in the kaf for the rest of your eternity. This is one of the frightening realities of Jinn worship, and it's something that has to be understood. So when one works with the Jinn, be it a marid, be it shaitan, be it an afreet, or even one of the lower ones like the skir or something like this, you have to be extremely respectful, and you have to really make sure the deal that you're making doesn't involve your demise or your future encapsulation. Now, many people bind jinns. Great. But what they won't tell you about binding Jinn is that to bind a Jinn, you have to ask for a king's permission. Then the king will bind the Jinn to your ring. After the Jinn has been bound to your ring, it is then released and sent back to its kingdom. However, if you do not do it correctly, the other jinns come looking for the Jinn. It also releases a high level frequency which attracts other jinns to it. And once again, the person is in extreme peril. I would strongly not recommend binding. I know I have a kadam on my ring, yeah, okay, but the kadam, when I spoke to it, sees it as its destiny to look after me, which is, praise Allah, praise God, praise everybody. I'm very grateful for that. But I've known of other people who have bound something to an object, and the Jinn is extremely distressed. They're the same as us. They have families, they have girlfriends, they have everything. So you binding it, you're putting it in prison, and it doesn't understand what it's done. And there is no Stockhausen syndrome for the Jinn. So I would strongly think twice about binding, and if you are going to bind, then you make sure that you talk to the Jinn King's emissary, and you make sure how long that Jinn can be bound to the object, and then after which you release it and you send it back to its kingdom. On the other side, working with the Jinn, you can find great spirituality, and you can find great peace within yourself. It's like anything. It's like a gun. If you're an idiot with a gun, you'll just go killing people. If you're a reasonably sane person with a gun, then you can defend yourself, you feel more confident, and you have a better life because of it. The Jinn are exactly the same, except the Jinn have free will. So all the time you have to make sure that you and the Jinn are in harmony. The moment you're not in harmony, you're in a war. And if you're in a war, it's relentless, trust me. Jinn worship is not for the weak. Seriously, it's not for the weak. It's only for the strong. And it's for the strong and respectful. So if you're interested in Jinn worship, I will gladly help you. However, if you're interested in abusing them and wanting to sort of encapsulate powerful, nasty Jinn, there are plenty more magicians and books out there that you can use. Personally, I won't use them. I won't even consider what they suggest, because I understand that working with the Jinn isn't for now. Working with the Jinn is for the rest of your life. You get it wrong, yes, you may get things on this earth all the time. However, when you die, you become a Jinn. Now, it's very complicated, but that's why I'm trying to say to you, a lot of the religions do not warn against working with Jinn because they think it's something cool to do. They warn you for a specific reason. The specific reason is they are dangerous. However, riding a motorcycle is dangerous. So you have to get the balance right. If you're going to drive like an idiot, you'll kill yourself. If you're going to drive within the realms of your skill and the realms of the motorcycle, then you'll have years and years of pleasure. But don't kid yourself, every motorcyclist crashes. And if you work with the Jinn, you will crash, because nobody is God. So you have to be cautious. You have to understand what you're doing. You have to really think about what you're doing. You have to meditate within yourself. And most of all, you have to be completely respectful. I would suggest if you do not respect yourself, then do not go anywhere near the Jinn. I would also suggest if you're not in a loving relationship, then I would not go anywhere near the Jinn. I was recently attacked, and it was the love of my wife helping me that allowed me to remove the entity, nothing else. And believe me, my friends who know me, they said I looked like I was dying. The thing was trying to kill me. So, it's not a game, okay? So please, if you're going to worship the Jinn, know love, know yourself, and know respect. Thank you for watching, and namaste.